So, the other day I was scrolling on my phone when I noticed a game I hadn't played in years, Among Us. I stared at the game as Vietnam-style flashbacks of lockdown and life in 2020 came flooding back. At that moment, one big question was racing through my mind. Why Among Us was no longer Among Us. Among Us Origins, the birth of deception. Among Us was launched by the game studio Innersloth in 2018. It was a humble beginning for this game, inspired by party classics like Mafia and Werewolf. Mafia is a simple yet engaging game where the townspeople must identify and eliminate the Mafia members. The game is divided into two primary factions: the Mafia, or Werewolves depending on the variation, and the townspeople. The Mafia's goal is to covertly eliminate the townspeople, while the townspeople aim to identify and eradicate the Mafia members. The concept of Among Us was simple yet ingenious. Crewmates complete tasks on a spaceship, while a few imposters secretly try to sabotage and eliminate them. Deception, teamwork, and lots of finger-pointing made for an engaging experience. Among Us was finally released in 2018 on iOS and Android, and it flopped. You may be wondering why such a good game flopped in its initial release. It was down to a few things like visibility, art style, hype, and competition. First off, let's talk visibility. When Among Us launched, it didn't have a massive marketing campaign. Innersloth was a small team without the resources for extensive promotion. In the crowded indie game market, it's easy for even great games to get lost without proper exposure. Then there's the art style. Among Us has a simple, cartoonish look, which, while charming, didn't scream must-play to a lot of gamers at first glance. In a world where gamers are often drawn to flashy graphics and realistic visuals, Among Us's simplistic design didn't make an immediate impact. Early player numbers were low, and in multiplayer games, that's a big deal. A game designed for social interaction needs a solid player base to thrive. With few people playing, matchmaking was slow, and many potential players bounced off when they couldn't find a game quickly. One final factor was competition. In 2018, there were several big multiplayer games dominating the scene, like Fortnite and PUBG. These games were already established and had massive followings, making it hard for our new, unknown indie game to compete for players' time and attention. Nevertheless, Innersloth didn't give up. They kept updating the game, fixing bugs, and adding new content. They listened to their small but dedicated community and slowly built up a better experience. And then in 2020, all their hard work finally started to pay off. The cause of the boom in Among Us: lockdown gaming. Streamers and YouTubers started picking the game up, especially during the pandemic when everyone was looking for ways to connect with friends online. The game's unique blend of cooperation and deception made for great content. And suddenly, Among Us went viral. Another massive boost to the game was the number of streamers and YouTubers playing Among Us. It garnered billions of views across both platforms, which meant the overall gamer base increased. This caused a snowball effect where Among Us had more interest, which meant more streamers were making videos, which would amass even more interest for the game, and so on. The impending downfall of Among Us. The downfall of Among Us can be attributed to a few key factors. First, the initial explosion of popularity was hard to maintain. Trends come and go.
I'm back.
And the gaming community is always on the lookout for the next big thing. Second, despite Innersloth's efforts, updates and new content rolled out slower than players hoped. In a world where gamers are spoiled with constant updates and fresh content, Among Us struggled to keep the momentum. Let's go over some major issues the game had and what caused it to get ejected from the gaming world. The major issues Among Us developed. Server issues. First, let's talk about the game's initial surge. When Among Us skyrocketed in popularity in 2020, it wasn't ready for the sudden influx of players. Server issues plagued the game, leading to frequent disconnections and lag. This was a huge frustration point for many players, especially during peak times. players would often get kicked out of games or fail to connect altogether. Innersloth, the small indie team behind Among Us, struggled to keep up with the server demands. This led to a lot of negative experiences, and some players simply moved on to more stable games. Simplicity. Next up, content stagnation. Initially, the simplicity of Among Us was its charm, but over time, players started craving more variety. Despite Innersloth's efforts to introduce new maps and features, the updates were slow to roll out. In the fast-paced world of gaming, where players are spoiled with constant new content, this slow pace just couldn't keep the community engaged. Simplicity was a strength for Among Us, but also a curse which led to its concluding doom. Streamers and YouTubers got bored. Then there was the issue of streamer burnout. A big part of Among Us's initial popularity came from streamers and YouTubers. However, as the game became repetitive, many content creators started to experience burnout. The same discussions, tasks, and accusations over and over led to a decrease in streaming and YouTube content, which in turn affected the game's visibility and appeal. With fewer big names playing the game, the hype started to die down. Viewers followed their favorite streamers to new games, leading to a decline in Among Us's player base. The introduction of Quick Chat. The team at Innersloth had the right intentions about Quick Chat, but they made things worse, and this led to public lobbies failing. The idea was to make communication faster and safer, especially for younger players. But instead of improving the game, Quick Chat created a host of new problems. Quick Chat was designed to let players communicate using preset phrases. Sounds convenient, right? But in a game that relies heavily on nuanced discussion and strategy, limiting players to a set list of phrases took away a lot of the depth and spontaneity that made Among Us so engaging. Imagine trying to explain a complex situation with only a few canned responses. "I saw red and electrical" just doesn't cut it when you need to argue your innocence or accuse someone with detailed observations. This limitation frustrated many players, who felt their ability to play the game effectively was hampered. Players who were under 13 had to use Quick Chat, and that was a huge chunk of Among Us players. This then led to the game's demise, as a huge portion of their market just found the game annoying and moved on. New maps. Finally, Innersloth tried to keep the gamer base engaged by adding new maps, and the introduction of new maps like the airship was exciting, but it came too late for many. By the time these updates arrived, a significant portion of the player base had already moved on to other games with more frequent updates and fresh content. The downfall of Among Us. But alas, all good things must come to an end. By late 2021, the player count was dropping faster than a crewmate in Electrical. New games emerged, the hype faded, and the new addition of cute pets wasn't enough to keep people engaged. Was it the lack of substantial updates or the natural gaming cycle? Maybe it was a bit of both. Like an imposter caught in the act, Among Us was ejected from the trending lists. There's a good chance Among Us won't make it back to the top of the gaming world because of how quickly the gaming industry moves on. However, that doesn't mean Innersloth will sit idly and let their precious game fall off into the shadows. Maybe new updates or a surge in streamer interest could bring the nostalgic game back. With its vibrant crewmates and thrilling deception, Among Us captured our imaginations and brought us together in a time of isolation. Its light may have dimmed, but the memories and laughter remain. Perhaps one day, in the quiet of space, the call of the emergency meeting will echo once more, and we'll gather again to decipher the truth among us.